Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about something a little different, a grammar topic. It's called the past perfect continuous tense.
Yes, it's very interesting. And this episode outline, this was actually made by AI.
It is.
It's fascinating how technology can help us to learn English grammar.
It's amazing. We're going to be exploring the past perfect continuous tense in detail, looking at its form, its uses, and how it's different from other tenses.
Yes, we will.
So let's start with the basics. What is the past perfect continuous tense, and how is it formed?
Well, it's a way to talk about an action that was happening continuously in the past before another action in the past. For example, imagine you went to a party last night,
Okay.
but before you went to the party, you were cooking dinner.
Okay. So I was cooking dinner before I went to the party.
Yes.
That's a good example.
Yes. To form this tense, we use had plus been and the ing form of the verb. So you could say, I had been cooking dinner.
I see. The Cambridge Dictionary gives us some examples, like I had been working, she had been reading, or they had been playing. So it seems like the combination of had been stays the same no matter who is doing the action.
That's correct.
It's a helpful tip for our listeners. It's always good to see those patterns. Now let's move on to how we actually use this tense.
Well, one way we use the past perfect continuous tense is to describe an action that was already in progress before a specific moment in the past.
Like in this example from Cambridge. It was so difficult to get up last Monday for school. I had been working on my essays the night before, and I was very tired.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
This sentence tells us that the person was working on their essays for a period of time leading up to Monday morning.
So the past perfect continuous helps us to understand why the person was so tired on Monday. It gives us the background information.
That's right.
It's like saying, this is what I was doing before this other thing happened.
Exactly.
Okay, I understand. Can you give me another example?
Of course. Imagine you were talking about a football game you watched yesterday. Maybe your favorite team lost the game, you could say. I was sad because my team lost the game. They had been playing well all season, but yesterday they made a lot of mistakes.
That makes sense. So we use the past perfect continuous to talk about what was happening before something else happened in the past. It's like giving more information about the past.
Exactly. And the Cambridge source mentions another way to use this tense. Sometimes the action in the past perfect continuous may have finished, but it still has an effect on the present situation.
Oh, I think I understand. Do you have an example?
Yes, I do. Let's imagine it was raining this morning. Now the rain has stopped, but the ground is still wet. We can use the past perfect continuous to explain this. We can say, the ground is wet because it had been raining.
Ah, I see. So even though the rain stopped, the fact that it had been raining is still evident because the ground is wet.
Yes, that's right. The past perfect continuous helps us to explain the connection between past events, even if one of the events has finished.
This is really helpful. So we've covered how the past perfect continuous is formed and two of its main uses. Now I'm curious. How is this tense different from other tenses that we might use to talk about the past?
That's a good question. A lot of people get confused between the past perfect continuous and the present perfect continuous.
I think I understand why. Both tenses talk about actions that continue over a period of time, but I guess there's an important difference.
Yes, you are right. Let's look at some examples to understand this. The English for Everyone guide has some good examples. It gives us I have been working, which is the present perfect continuous. And then we have I had been working, which is the past perfect continuous.
Okay, so the only difference is have versus had. What does that mean?
It's about time. The present perfect continuous with have been means the action started in the past and is still continuing now. Like when we say, I have been studying English for 3 years, this means you started studying English 3 years ago and you're still studying English now.
That makes sense. So what about the past perfect continuous with had been?
With had been, we're talking about an action that continued up to a specific point in the past, but it doesn't continue into the present. We are talking about a period of time that is completely in the past.
So if I say, I had been living in London for 5 years before I moved to Paris. This means I lived in London for 5 years, but then I moved to Paris, and now I don't live in London anymore.
Exactly. That's a great example. The action of living in London happened completely in the past. It finished when you moved to Paris.
Okay, I'm starting to understand this. So the present perfect continuous is like a bridge between the past and present, while the past perfect continuous is firmly in the past.
Yes, that's a good way to think about it. And the English for Everyone guide shows this very clearly. It compares the two tenses on a timeline. The present perfect continuous extends to now, while the past perfect continuous stops at a specific point in the past.
I like how you use the word timeline because it makes me think of the past perfect continuous as a spotlight. It's like shining a light on a specific period of activity in the past before something else happened.
That's a very good analogy. It captures the essence of the past perfect continuous. It helps us to focus on the duration of an action leading up to another event in the past.
That's a much easier way to understand it than just memorizing grammar rules. So why should our listeners care about this tense? How will knowing and using the past perfect continuous make a difference in their English speaking and writing?
That's a very good point. It's important to understand how we can use grammar to communicate better. The past perfect continuous is a useful tool. It helps you to give more information and be more precise when talking about past events.
Can you give me an example?
Of course, instead of just saying I was tired because I worked on my essays, you can say I was tired because I had been working on my essays all night. That small change adds a layer of emphasis and highlights how long you were working and how it affected you.
That's true. It gives a much better picture of the situation.
Yes, it does. The more precisely you can express yourself, the better other people will understand you. And when you are reading or listening to English, the past perfect continuous can help you to understand the order of events and the connections between actions in the past.
So it's not just about speaking and writing, but also about understanding English better.
That's right. It helps you to use the language more effectively in all situations.
I'm starting to realize that the past perfect continuous is more common and useful than I thought. It's like a secret tool that can really help us to improve our English.
Yes, I agree. And once you understand the concept, it's actually quite simple to use.
I'm glad to hear that. It's good to know that we can learn this tense without too much difficulty.
Absolutely. Just remember the key things we discussed. The structure, the use of had been plus the ing form of the verb, the focus on an action continuing in the past before another event, and the difference from the present perfect continuous. With a little practice, using the past perfect continuous will become very easy for you.
This has been a very helpful conversation. Thank you for explaining this grammar concept so clearly.
You're welcome. I always enjoy talking about the English language, and I liked your analogy about the spotlight. It's a very good way to visualize the past perfect continuous.
I'm glad you liked it. Now, before we move on, let's recap some of the key points for our listeners.
Yes, that's a good idea. Repetition is helpful when learning new things.
Absolutely. So we started by explaining that the past perfect continuous is used to talk about actions that were in progress before another point in the past. And we learned that the form is always had been, plus the ing form of the main verb.
Yes, that's right. We also looked at two main ways to use this tense. First, to describe an action that was ongoing before a specific point in the past. And second, to show how an action, even if it has finished, has a lasting effect on a situation.
And we discussed how the past perfect continuous is different from the present perfect continuous. The key difference is time. The present perfect continuous connects the past to the present, while the past perfect continuous focuses only on a finished period in the past.
That's a very good summary. I think we have covered a lot of information in this first part of our discussion about the past perfect continuous. There's more to come. But for now, let's take a short break. We'll come back soon to give you some more examples and practice exercises to help you understand this interesting tense.
See you soon.
Welcome back. It's great to continue our discussion about the past perfect continuous tense.
I'm excited to get back into it and really grasp this tense.
Me too. So, to our listeners, are you ready for some more examples? I think they'll really help to make this grammar point clear.
Definitely. Examples are always the best way to see how grammar works in real life.
That's right. Let's start with a simple situation. Imagine you're talking to a friend about a movie you saw last week. You might say something like, I was a little late for the movie because I had been helping my neighbor with their groceries.
That's a good example that we can all relate to and use every day. So in that sentence, we're using the past perfect continuous had been helping to explain why I was late to the movie.
Exactly. It shows that the action of helping your neighbor was happening before you went to the movie, and that the helping action continued for some time.
It's like saying, this is what I was doing before I went to the movie.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Let's look at another example. Imagine you were at a concert and you're talking about the band, you could say. The band was amazing. The crowd had been waiting for hours, so everyone was very excited when they finally came on stage.
That's a good example. The past perfect continuous had been waiting shows us that the crowd was waiting for a long time before the band came on stage. And that makes the sentence more exciting.
These examples show that the past perfect continuous isn't just about facts. It's also about creating a story and making the story flow.
That's true. It helps us to communicate more effectively. Now, let's try a more difficult example.
Okay, I'm ready.
Imagine you are reading a book about history, and you see the sentence. The Queen had been ruling for 10 years when the war started.
That sounds interesting. So in this sentence, the past perfect continuous had been ruling, tells us that the Queen was the ruler for 10 years before the war started.
Yes, that's right. This information helps us to understand the situation in the country before the war started.
It's like the past perfect continuous is setting the scene for a big event in history.
Exactly. It's like creating a background for the events that happen in the story.
This is really helping me to understand how useful this tense is. It can give us a lot of information in just one sentence.
Yes, it can. And the more we learn about it, the more we see how we can use it in different ways.
So how can our listeners practice using the past perfect continuous tense and feel more confident?
That's a great question. One good way is to think about your own experiences and try to describe them using this tense. For example, you could think about what you were doing before an important event in your life.
That's a great idea. It helps us to connect grammar to our own lives.
Yes, we want to make grammar feel like something we can use, not just rules that we have to learn.
And remember, you don't have to be perfect right away. The most important thing is to practice and get better over time.
That's right. Learning a language is a journey. It takes time, and it's okay to make mistakes. Actually, mistakes can help us to learn.
That's true. Don't be afraid to try using the past perfect continuous when you are speaking and writing in English. The more you use it, the easier it will become.
And remember, you have resources like the Cambridge Dictionary and the English for Everyone guides to help you. These resources give you clear explanations, examples, and pictures to make grammar easier to learn.
That's good to know. It's always helpful to have good resources to help us.
Now, before we move to the final part of our discussion, I want to emphasize one important thing for our listeners. Grammar rules are important, but the real power of language is using it to connect with other people and share our experiences.
That's a really good point. Grammar is a tool that we can use to communicate.
Exactly. So when you practice the past perfect continuous, don't just focus on the rules. Think about the stories you want to tell, the feelings you want to express, and the connections you want to make when you are communicating.
That reminds us that language is not just about rules. It's also about expressing ourselves, connecting with others, and sharing our lives.
That's right. Now let's move to the final part of our discussion. We'll explore some fun and interactive activities to help you to understand the past perfect continuous tense and use it naturally in your English.
That sounds great. Are you ready for the final challenge?
Yes, I am. And I think our listeners are too.
We are back for the last part of our discussion about the past perfect continuous tense.
Yes, we are. And I'm excited to share some activities and resources that will help you to practice this tense and have fun while you're learning.
So it's time to really put into practice using the past perfect continuous and make it feel natural in our English.
Yes, that's right. So, to our listeners, get ready to put what you've learned so far into practice.
One idea is to use pictures. When you look at a picture, try to describe what was happening before the picture was taken. This is a good way to practice using your imagination.
That's a great idea. For example, imagine a picture of a cat. That is wet, you could say. The cat had been playing in the rain.
That's a good example. It's a fun way to use your imagination and practice using the past perfect continuous. What about role-playing? I think a lot of people learn by doing.
I like that idea. Role-playing helps you to practice using the tense when you're talking to someone. For example, you and a friend could pretend that one of you is late for a meeting because you were stuck in traffic.
That happens to everyone. So you could use the past perfect continuous to explain why you were late.
Yes, you could say, "I'm sorry I'm late. I had been stuck in traffic."
That's a good example. And you could even make it more difficult by adding more details, like, I had been listening to music while I was in traffic, so I didn't realize how late it was getting.
That's a very good idea. It's good to practice using longer and more complex sentences. And there are lots of online quizzes and exercises that you can use to practice.
Yes, there are. You can find quizzes on websites like the Cambridge Dictionary. These quizzes are really useful because they can help you to check your understanding and learn from your mistakes.
That's right. And remember, practicing doesn't have to be boring. You can make it fun by doing activities that you enjoy. For example, when you're watching a movie, try to notice how the characters use the past perfect continuous tense.
That's a good idea. And I can try to guess what the character is going to say next.
Yes, that's a good way to learn, without even realizing that you're learning. And as you see and hear the past perfect continuous being used more often, it will become easier for you to use it yourself.
So to our listeners out there, it is possible to learn how to use the past perfect continuous tense. You can do it if you practice, be patient, and use your imagination.
Yes, I agree. Learning English is an ongoing process, and the more you practice, the better you will become.
This has been a very interesting discussion about the past perfect continuous tense. Thank you for joining me and sharing your knowledge with us.
It was my pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to our discussion about this grammar point. Keep practicing and keep learning, and you will see how much your English improves.
And if you're a friend of the show, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating discussions about the English language and other topics. Thanks for listening.